met my mum for the first time when I was in the care home, and she rocks up with a mate who looks similar to her. So I'm told, guess which one your mum is?
There was someone that you met in the care home, quite an incredible force in your life.
Smars was a worker in this care home. None of the boys went to school in this home, and he forced me to go to school. So every day at 7 a.m, without fail, he would make sure that I was up getting ready for school. To be in a home where nobody cared, nobody went to school, but then you've got this bloke who is so persistent, it was life-changing.
Being in a house where you've been told you're welcome, but then not feeling it,
Oof.
How do you deal with that?
I was in this children's home, and then I'm told a foster mum wants you, make it work. And then another part of that home, I was introduced to respites. Me being summoned in her living room to be told that she wants a break from me. I'm kind of in and out of this feeling of normality. And then professionals come to the house. I'm told you have to leave. And I never graduate from the pain of having to retell them.
Ashley, hello.
Hello, what's cracking?
What is cracking? We've got so much to talk about, and I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast because this is our first proper chance to chat.
Yes.
We were both at this gorgeous Shaping Us symposium at the end of last year, and it was all about early childhood development. And towards the end of that symposium, you got up and talked a little bit about your own life story, but talked about, well, essentially what it's like to be in care as a young kid and the impact that it has and the importance of mentors. And that, I mean, not just me, the whole room was hanging off your every word. You're honestly, you're so eloquent and told a part of your story. You had to squeeze it into a couple of minutes, but you told your story so beautifully, and I was just intrigued to hear more from you. Handily, you've written a book.
Yeah. Looked after. Wow, what a process.
What a process.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you've made documentaries and reports on the care system, but this is a deep dive, and it's taken you 2 years to write this book. So what has that process been like?
Wow, it's been, how do I articulate the process of writing this book? It has forced me to look back at my childhood in a way that I never have before. And I'm very forward focused. I'd like to think I'm progressive. I like to keep it moving. And actually, part of that's probably because I'm trying to get away from my childhood. But writing this, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I had to consider moments. I had to remember. I had to put myself in my child state. I had to become a boy again. I had to open up to that little boy that's still inside. And I had to, really go back to moments of trauma, moments of rejection, moments that I probably look back with a bit of nostalgia now. But to do all of that, I had to give myself space. I had to give myself time. It wasn't easy. But I look at that book, I look at that physical copy of my book, and I'm proud. I'm proud that I was able to do it, and hopefully it resonates with people when they read some of those experiences. But it was a journey, and it was wild. And I have a little family, and they were really supportive. My wife was incredible, but without the community that I now have, it would have been impossible for me to do.
Oh, it's so good, and it's so interesting to hear you say that. I guess you train yourself to be forward thinking because you don't want to look back. And I think many people that will chime with them, or that we're all to an extent on the run from something. It might be in childhood, or it might be, just a few years back. But many of us are caught in that, what's next? I'm on the run. So this is interesting that when you've got to sit in it and you've got to really not run, you've got to sit there and look at it all and poke around in the bits that are really painful still. That is so hard, and it's so draining. But I think usually part of the healing process, do you think that's happened during the writing of this book, that it's helped you understand a bit more about your past or the impact that it's had on you?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the main things that the book's allowed me to do is it's allowed me to take the time to process trauma. So again, that thing of being forward thinking is that you may sometimes try to suppress trauma that's still live and active. But I was in this process of writing about things, and just emotions would flare up. So, for example, I lived in a foster home, and I went on a photo shoot with this foster mum and her biological kids. And despite being at the shoot, I wasn't in the photo that made the living room wall, you know? And that's the sort of thing that I'd never thought about properly before. But when I wrote about that, I was like, shit, like,
yeah,
that's heavy. That's really heavy. And I had to, like, you know, I told my missus when I wrote it, and she reacted. And it's those details, those really niche things of my story that I've never really reflected on. The book forced me to do that. And I realized in that process that I have to give myself the space to feel that stuff. And so I'd say, yeah, that's one of the gifts of the book. It's allowed me to, like, reflect on things and feel it and process in a way that, honestly, Fearne, I would never have done, you know. So that's been a gift, like trying to process and reflect and consider the trauma that is still very active in my life as a 34-year-old bloke.
Yeah, of course. But, you know, when you're a kid and when you're a little kid, moments like the one you've just described, you're not going to go, oh, I need to work out why that felt painful or why does this hurt? You are trying to survive something that feels, you know, inherently uncomfortable. So you just push through it, and then you end up as an adult going, oh my God, what are all these moments, these big moments, these micro moments that are still in me, that are still, you know, I think most people have that trauma in them somewhere, and it's in your physical body as well as your
100%,
mind. And you've got to, you know, that is the bad news for any of us, is you have to kind of move with it and move through it to come out the other side of it. And it's not easy. There's no easy way around it. I mean, to go back on some of your incredible life story, the book starts age 4 when you were, this is the first foster carer that you can actively remember. And Joyce, your first foster parent.
Good old Joyce.
She seemed to make such a huge impact on you. You call her your Caribbean grandmother, or that was the feeling of her.
She is like, have you seen The Nutty Professor?
Yes.
She is like the mum in The Nutty Professor. She's like this matriarch and incredible cook. I have such incredible thoughts of being around a dinner table with her, like at the centre, like in her orbit, and just thinking that she would be my forever home.
That wasn't the case.
No.
And this is the sort of start of a string of rejection that you were dealing with. And that felt like, I mean, I wept reading your book. It's the moment where you were picked up by your social worker to drive away from Joyce's. I was in bits. I was like, I can't imagine at that young age, those formative years where you're being ripped away from the only comfort and stability that you've known. That's a massive trauma to go through.
It is. And, you know, that happened to me as an infant, and that was a long time ago. You know, we're talking a couple of decades, or just under a couple of decades maybe. But that's still happening to so many children in the care system. Most kids are being turfed between homes. When I think back to Joyce, when I had to leave her, I wasn't really prepared. Like, there was no, you know, here's where you're going to be moving to. Because I was eventually moved to a children's home, a residential care home with shift workers. And I didn't know that was happening until I was turfed into a car. So I'm watching children's telly. I'm eating my cereal. It's a spring morning. I know that something's going to happen. I just don't know the details. And so I'm kind of in and out of this feeling of normality. And then professionals come to the house and I'm told, you have to leave. You have to leave. And I never graduate from the pain of having to retell that. Like, it just doesn't roll off the tongue. Like I remember it. I remember Joyce. I remember what she was doing. She began to pack clothes for me. I began to beg her to keep me, you know, as a little kid. And as far as I'm concerned, that's my mum. You know, that's all I remember. And I mean, it's really hard to talk about, but basically, you know, these workers who I don't know, put me into a car. Sissy's Joyce is kind of getting my stuff. And yeah, I'm inconsolable. I'm weeping. I'm a kid who's having like the biggest attachment in his life cut. And there's nothing I can do about it. And she's kind of got this front of silence. And so, yeah, being put into that car. And then I just remember like kneeling up as much as I could, this little frame, trying to look through the back window of this car to Joyce, who's now stood outside the house. And like we're driving off, and I'm just screaming, and I'm uncontrollable. And as the car drives off, she gets smaller because we're going into the distance. We turn a corner and she's gone. And that was the first time I recall the deep rejection of being in care. Even then, I didn't know where they were taking me to. Like I didn't know. I didn't know the people in the car. I knew my social worker, but there were other professionals that I had no clue who they were. And it was just little details, like I'm driving down roads that I know, and I pass my barbershop, and I'm like, am I going to go to the barbershop again? And, you think about your mates and you think about your community, and you're turfed from it. Yeah, it's horrible to talk about, Fearne. But I suppose I am, because I'm talking about it because still so many looked after children are experiencing these kind of moments of rejection. I mean, when you go into the care system, that's a deep rejection. There's probably going to be abandonment for the average kid in care. And then to feel like you're in a home that's stable, that's good for you, to then be turfed from that home. And, for me, it happened a lot of times. And yeah, from there, I'm in a care home, and it's basically a home there were other boys my age, and I'm kind of sent to a room that's now my bedroom. and then I an hour or so into being in that home, I was allowed to call Joyce again. And just hearing her voice, like in the book I call it a bereavement, because no one's died, and actually she lived down the road still, like she was a drive away. But I had no access. I had no opportunity to be in her embrace, to be in her home again, to be with my family. And there were probably legitimate reasons why I had to leave. I still don't fully know why, but maybe she didn't want to foster anymore, or maybe she could have been ill, or there could have been a range of reasons. Maybe she was a short-term foster carer. But for a child who's so young, like, how do you dress that up? How do you explain that? What language can you put on that to make them feel like it's reasonable? So yeah, I mean, it was a deep moment of trauma that I don't think I'll ever fully get over.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising. It wasn't gradual and incremental transition. It's a matter of hours from you're sat watching TV eating Cocoa Pops, and then the next thing you know, you're with a bunch of strangers, and you're meant to cope, and you're meant to survive that. It's so full on. And it seemed like around this time when you're a very young kid, not only was there that level of trauma and the rejection, but also it's confusing. Because like you say, you can call Joyce, but you can't see Joyce. Yeah. At this point, you'd also seen a photograph of your biological mum, but you hadn't met her at this point. Yeah. So you've seen a picture of her, you know what she looks like, and she becomes this sort of like goddess to you, like this imagined person. Like an angel. Like an angel. Yeah. I mean, that's so much for you to get your head around at such a young age, as well as being in this complete new environment where also, I guess the thing, and I talked a little bit about this with Lem Sisse.
Oh, shout out to Lem. Isn't he amazing?
We are all in love with Lem.
He's a G.
Okay, we are so in love with Lem. I don't know what to do. And I read his poetry books, and I weep, and he's just brilliant. But the similar themes that I was reading about in your book within a care home, that lack of physical comfort, that lack of tactility, that lack of affection, which, as we know, as young kids, is vital, that you have simple things like hugs, stuff that we all take for granted that you get a hug off your mum, your dad, your nan, your granddad, whoever it might be that's looking after you. You don't get that in a care home. How do you think that's impacted you?
Oh, wow. So I've got 2 beautiful girls. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I am so affectionate. I mean, that I probably won't label on because that's where I could get a bit emotional talking about my kids, but I am so affirming physically with them because I didn't have it. And so, yeah, how it's impacted me. I mean, you know, I would like to think that I've taken the coldness of that time and somehow converted it to the opposite, you know, being you know, making sure I don't enforce that on my kids, making sure that I don't project that kind of treatment onto them and onto my wife and onto my community. But even that is like a behavior that I had to learn throughout so the children's home and then the other homes that I lived in, and I talk about it, just the lack of touch. And I think you know, being a typical boy, I tried to shoulder it, I tried to put on a front, but I wanted a hug. I remember when Mufasa died in The Lion King.
It was seminal for all of us, this moment.
I remember when Mufasa died in The Lion King, and I was watching it in that children's home. Again, thinking on moments that I would never think about.
Yeah. But
I remember there was a worker, and I was like, no, I'm cool. Like, oh, Mufasa's died. And like, it never even occurred to me that I could go to this worker, this bloke, for a hug, right, as a kid. But I should have had the option to be a bit sad and be vulnerable and get a little hug, you know, whilst watching, you know, Mufasa die.
Yeah. But
those kind of comforts were never afforded to me. Yeah, it's really hard to talk about. I mean, those just basic comforts of childhood sort of attachment and bonds, I didn't have access to. And the outcomes for children in care are not good, like statistically, without getting into the numbers, like be it higher education, be it employment, like typically we don't do as well as the general public. And I do think that the trauma of not getting a hug or being moved, you know, between homes, I think all of that stuff, it affects your outlook, it affects your future prospects, it affects your aspirations. So it's really hard to pin down, like, you know, the kind of broad impact of it. But I can say that there's certainly a connection, in my view, between, you know, not being hugged and loved properly as a kid and your future outcome. Yeah,
well, it's how you view the world, isn't it? If you see it as this unstable, hostile place, you're going to act differently. So it's totally understandable, and I think we can all probably guess what the correlation is. Mm-hmm. There was someone that you met in the care home who was quite an incredible force in your life, and maybe you realised the full impact that he had on you down the line. But can you tell us about Miles?
Miles was like this kind of light in a very dark place. You know, context, Miles was a worker in this care home. None of the boys went to school in this home, not because they had created reasons. So there was a culture of not caring. There was a culture of boys not doing things and the workers not pushing them. So when I moved in, no one went to school. They all had excuses and reasons why they didn't want to go. So day to day, people would wake up, get the Xbox out or the PlayStation, kick about outside. And I very much embedded myself into that lifestyle. But this guy, Miles, was one of the workers. He was a shift worker. But I remember number one, he found me a school in the local area, Gallywall Primary School, and he forced me to go to school. So every day at 7 a.m, without fail, he would make sure that I was up getting ready for school. He's Caribbean. I mean, there's a theme. Caribbean people are great, but Ashley, get up for school. You know, have your wash. You got clean boxer shorts or briefs and like all of that. And I was like, pipe down, Miles, please leave me alone. And he was so persistent. And if he wasn't on shift, and this is what I just think's remarkable, he would call up the office and he made sure that a worker was getting me ready for school. And being a typical kid, I found him hella annoying. I hated it. I really did. And I despise him a lot of the time. But it's that tough love. Yeah. It's tough love that so many of the boys didn't get in that home because they weren't a priority to anyone. And he was so persistent in that, Fearne, that school became normal. And to some that might sound really trivial, but that was quite miraculous in that home, to be in a home where nobody cared, nobody went to school, but then you've got this bloke who is so persistent in a daily thing, getting you to get up to go to school. That was life-changing. It was life-changing. And I didn't appreciate at the time just what that meant and what it represented and how much he cared and loved me. But looking back now as, you know, a guy with kids, I'm like, wow, that is incredible. Like that is the kind of love, the going above and beyond on a daily basis that changes the world. It's that energy that changes the world for the better. I'm so grateful to Miles. And he has a form of skin cancer now. And I lost touch with him when I left that home. I hadn't seen him for well over a decade. And I bumped into him on a South London high street.
No way.
Yeah, I bumped into him some years ago and I shouted out his name. And he was with his daughter, who's an adult. And he recognised me. Can you imagine if he didn't recognise me? Who is this kid? I'm like, this guy's changed my life.
Of course he recognised you.
Yeah, he recognised me.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, and I bumped into him. And it's like this like cheeky kid just came out of me and I just reverted back to who I was. And I shouted out to him, ran over to him, and he said to me, "How are you?" And he was clearly a bit concerned with the question because I went on to find out that he had bumped into other boys and it was often a bad report. It was a bad response. Like, yeah, I won't share their stories in detail, but there was one boy who had come out of prison, that kind of narrative. Yeah. And I looked at his daughter and I said, "I'm good, you know, I'm good." And I said to his daughter, I said, "Your dad is an absolute legend." And I explained to him like what I was doing in my life and all of that. And to be able to honour him in that full circle moment was incredible. And also because, you know, in the book I write up until I leave care. So I don't really talk about now, but to be able to honour him in front of his daughter and say to him, like, what you did, like just that small decision, that unseen, unglamorous, in this age of let's broadcast everything to the world, just a very private, internal, daily decision to help me, to be able to say like, that changed my life. It's just such a sweet moment, you know, to be able to tell him.
It's so important. This is why I was so captivated by your speech at the symposium, because I think these unsung heroes don't get enough light shone on them. And obviously the whole theme of the Shaping Us campaign is to look at early development. And of course there's this huge onus on parents and what parents are doing, but this is much wider spread than just looking at a mum and dad or just a mum or just a dad. This is looking at wider family. This is looking at community. This is looking at great teachers, people that, like, everybody's got a chance to impact a kid's life positively.
Yes.
And we can never truly understand just the magnitude of what that means and what it could lead to. And of course, you know, for Miles, I'm sure at times it could have been laborious, or just like maybe he was hitting his head against a wall, like, is this kid going to go to school? Yeah. But he kept at it. And to show that these important key figures in kids' lives make a huge difference, not only to the individual, but to society. Yes. I mean, why are we not talking about this more? Why 100%. Are we not encouraging everybody to mentor, to help out with kids in their local area? Yeah. This is game-changing stuff. And I want to get on to how he helped whether he knew it or not at the time, but shape your life and just steer the direction with help from some other key figures coming down the line. So after you'd been in the care home, you get offered a placement at another foster family's home.
Yeah.
This was not so great. This seemed from the start like quite a painful experience. And this is the same family setup you described with the family picture being taken and you not getting put on the wall. So this moves us to Carmen. So Carmen was sort of embedded in quite a religious lifestyle. She was part of the Salvation Army, which you seem to despise, sort of being entrenched in that world most weekends until you discovered music, which is another beautiful theme.
Yeah.
But being in a house where you've been told you're welcome, but then not feeling it, that is very problematic. And I think what I was imagining when I was reading this section was just how much you were physically holding in, because you don't have a voice. You can't say you're unhappy because you've got to be the good, quiet foster child who doesn't get kicked out of this family home. So you're holding on to all of this. You've been told you're welcome, but you know you're not.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? How do you navigate your day-to-day in that environment?
An important thing to say is, to the regular person reading about Carmen, it sounds cold, it sounds toxic, it sounds wrong. When you're used to being shunted between homes, you normalise stuff. So what might appear to be really, really unjust, when you're a kid who's just been shunted between homes, you feel like they're doing you a favour. You feel like you're lucky. Which is just like wild. Excuse me. It's wild to even think like that. But the way that Carmen was presented to me was, this is your moment. Like, this is your big moment. I was in this children's home and then I'm told a foster mum wants you. Make it work. Like, you've got a trial run. You've got 2 weeks to go there and you've got 2 weeks to make a good impression. So in my head, I'm thinking, it's like an audition for one of these big shows that we watch. So you're thinking, I've got to be likable. I've got to be compliant. I've got to be well-mannered. And as that word you say about suppressing, so true. Like you're literally suppressing so much because you want a roof over your head. If you're a regular kid with regular emotions, like acting out, being cheeky, being your true self, that might mean you won't have a home. And so you're in this really weird performance mode. And actually some of our greatest stars come from these sorts of backgrounds because, and it's a really sad thing to say, you learn to be a really good performer. Which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I had to perform. And so, and underpinning that is, well, I need to be grateful. I'm lucky because there's some boys back at the home that I, used to live at. They don't have a foster. I'm waiting to take them into their home. But over time, it just became really hard. Like we talk about touch. There was no touch in that home. And, the church was hard for me as well. I mean, I came to appreciate that church. But again, like I'm in this very middle class setting and I'm with this woman that I don't feel connected to, and I'm having to smile and again perform because I have to be this kid to make it in this home. And I don't think that's talked about enough, like the pressures of having to move between homes and having to recalibrate and almost represent yourself to fit into a new community. I had to do that at such a young age, always trying to work out what I needed to be in order to flourish, in order to survive. So it was really tough, and the coldness just began to affect me, and then little details began to affect me, like the photo, not being in the family photo. Sundays she would eat with her relatives out. She'd go out and meet her relatives, and often I'd be at home. And And it just kind of disintegrated for me. And then another part of that home, I was introduced to respites.
I was shocked about this, which is my ignorance. I didn't know that this was part of what could happen in a foster family. So tell us about these respite moments.
Yeah, basically, me being summoned to a meeting of social workers and the foster mum, Carmen, in her living room to be told that she wants a break from me. And then I'm sent somewhere else for a period of time.
And when you say sent somewhere else, you're sent to a stranger's house that you've never met for a little break for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And again, you got to fit in, you got to feel some level of comfort so you can sleep at night.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt terrified for you. There was one night where you got sent off to someone's house and she's like having a rave all night in her house and you couldn't get to sleep. I was like, I felt sick. And, you know, you're a dad, I'm a mum. I'm sort of imagining my kids in this situation and it's heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching to think about these moments where you're just sent off to some random person's house. Yeah,
that moment, I haven't thought about that moment prior to writing the book for years. Like I've not thought about that moment for years. And like it's not even just come up in thought. And so when I was writing the book and I had to reflect on that for the first time for a long time, it was really hard. That was one of the most sort of triggering things to write about for me. The respite where they were having that rave, as you call it, because I don't think I normalized so much crap back then that I don't think I really understood just how wrong that was. This woman, and I'm sure she's a lot like, what I don't want to do is some of these people are human. Some of these people are complex. They have all sorts of emotions.
Yeah.
They have good intents. They're not bad people, but she had clearly been used to taking in kids for temporary periods of time. So when I went to her house, there was no effort to make me feel welcome. I'd been told that Carmen wanted a break. I'm sent to this house. She's planned some sort of family party that night, the night that I move in. So I'm basically in a bedroom, and then all her family and friends arrive, and it's bashment music, and it's like cocktails and Kool-Aid and chicken and, you know, Caribbean cuisine, and everyone's having a good time basically. But I'm in this room with no clue who the people outside the door are. And I'm still processing the fact that Carmen wanted a break from me and that she didn't want me to be in her home. And I just remember being terrified to leave the room to get food. I was so hungry that night, and I was too scared to leave to get food. And I just remember going out in the evening, late in the evening, to get a bit of chicken or whatever, and just the noise, the people, literally being in a foreign place, going up to this person who was now my carer, who I didn't know, being like, "Can I have some food, please?" It's literally like Oliver Twist.
Yeah.
It's literally like Oliver Twist. And I have, as I've said, I haven't thought about that for a long time. So to go back to that moment and remember that stuff was really hard. And some, you know, there are policy people who say respite's a really good thing because it enables a foster carer to have a break. And that is a legitimate point. Like, you know, if you're a foster parent, you should feel supported. You should feel like you've got the resources to be able to be a good foster parent. But again, if we're putting the child at the center of that situation, for a social worker to turf a child out of a home, put them somewhere for a couple of weeks where they don't know the community that they're in, they don't know the family, how can that be good? How can that be good for their long-term outcomes? It was a horrible time.
Well, it's not. I think we can say that's a fact, that we know it's not a good thing. And this is still something that goes on today. And, you know, we know that there's flaws within the care system and it's too big of a problem for any single person to figure out. But it's important that we know about this stuff and that we know that the reality of it. Around this time, you were also having irregular meets with your biological mum.
Yeah.
How was that? They obviously the majority of them seem really positive experiences, but never quite long enough.
Wow. So I met my mum for the first time when I was in the care home where Miles oversaw. I was in the care home where Miles looked after me. And even how I met her was quite strange, because it was in the kitchen of the care home with all these professionals around. It was almost like a summer soiree type vibe. Like, people have got, plastic cups with drinks, tuna sandwiches. I don't know half of the workers. And I'm being told that I'm about to meet my biological mum. And she rocks up with a mate who looks similar to her. So I'm told, guess which one your mum is? And I think it's meant to be a really light-hearted comment, but I'm like, this is like the biggest moment in my life so far. And the social worker's telling me to guess who my mum is. And fortunately, I was right. Like, I guessed the right person. I mean, as a grown man, if someone told me to do that in that sort of scenario, I'd tell them other words now.
Fuck off.
Yeah, 100%. But, as a kid with all these powerful people around you with authority over your life, you are going to likely be compliant. And so that was a very surreal kind of moment, beyond just meeting her, like having to navigate how it was organised. She hugged me. And that's a big deal, because as we've touched on, in that home, there wasn't touch.
No.
And I still can smell like her hair. Oh, geez, Fearne, you are asking me the Oprah questions. It's really hard to talk about.
Of course
She hugged me.
And
It's really, even as a grown man, I can still feel, I get goosebumps saying that, because I can smell her hair, like brushing on like my ear and my head, and like the embrace. And yeah, she hugged. That's all I need to say. She hugged me. But then from there, it was supervised visits. So it was, we'll go to a local restaurant and I would have half an hour with her. As a dad, it's really hard to talk about. And the social worker would be sitting in a corner some meters away whilst I'd be trying to have a normal, like, get to know your mum type vibe. And you can only imagine how emotional it was for her. She was quite young still, and she's obviously got guilt. She's obviously got a lot of trauma herself, and she's now trying to present herself into my life again.
And she was in care as a kid, as was her brother. So you have some understanding that this is a cycle in your lineage.
Yeah.
And you can kind of understand how she's ended up in this situation. It's... You know how the care system works at this point.
I've always been very sympathetic and loving to my mum. I've never seen her as someone who's done something wrong, especially now as an adult. Like, I can only imagine what she would have gone through, when she was a kid, to have been in care. She was doing the best with what she had and the lack of resources and tools that she had. But to have these like fragmented visits where I'm being supervised by professionals, again, like, this stuff still happens. And some experts might say, well, you need to have safeguarding measures in place when you're creating a connection for the first time, because we don't know what the mum could be like, or whatever, any valid reason, but that's not going to be good for the kid. And I just, it was really hard to navigate the kind of furniture of how I met her. And then our first big trip, like, those sort of incremental supervised visits went well. And then it kind of all led to, Ash, you can have a day out with your mum at Cheshunt World of Adventures. And I was so excited, but how bittersweet is it for me to say that, like, that was some big moment. That should have been the norm for me. And then that led to a sleepover with her, and it just kind of over time developed.
Yeah, it's a lot. I know it's a lot for you to even talk about, so I appreciate it so massively, you talking through your story, because it's not easy, and it's by no means simple. More change afoot. You change foster homes. So you've been living with Carmen. in this uncomfortable situation, and during one of these, was it a respite break?
It was a respite,
remember.
yeah.
With Evelyn and Clinton, a family who also had a couple of daughters. You felt at home. You actually felt embraced and welcomed. And at one of these meetings with and this is the other thing that we have, I mean, there's so much to cover in this story, but the other change that seemed relentless was your social worker kept changing. So 100%. It's not just foster families and carers. Your social worker, who seems to be a vital cog in this wheel, whether you like it or not, keeps changing. So there's just no consistency.
Yeah. Well, to that point, we talk about attachments in early years and the importance of having a consistent person, adult that loves you. For most kids in care, that is just not a possibility.
No.
Now, it's important to say there are some incredible foster parents, great social workers who are working in a really creaking and ill-equipped system. But the norm is for a looked after child that you're not going to have a consistent relationship if you're in the system long enough.
Yeah.
I talk about how hard it was to leave Joyce's at the start, but over time, I am trying to protect myself. I'm trying to become a bit colder, a bit more detached. I'm not trusting these adults. When I get a new social worker, I'm not trying to get to know you. I'm not trying to cultivate a relationship, because I know for a fact that social worker, that adult, that teacher, that foster carer is likely going to let me go. So you normalize rejection. What a horrible thing to have to do as a kid.
Horrible.
You normalize not being wanted. And then if you do something wrong, if you make a mistake, if you get in trouble at school, you then are anticipating that will translate to, I don't want you anymore, from some adult in your life. In terms of attachment, I'm not an expert in attachment, but I can only imagine how that messes you up.
And that's something that, as an adult, you've got to work out in your own time, probably forever. It's not going to be a quick fix with that one, because it's your whole childhood.
Yeah.
So this seemed like a pivotal moment in the book where you really, for whatever reason, felt you could advocate for yourself and say, I don't want to be at Carmen's anymore. I'm going to go and live with these guys. And Evelyn and Clinton seemed to happily accept you into their world.
Yeah.
And Carmen was accepting of it.
Yeah.
So you got to move, and that seemed like a moment of autonomy that you perhaps hadn't experienced before then.
Yeah, the first time. So I went on this respite with Evelyn and Clinton. At the end of the 2-week period, they said, you know what, would love to have you. And I, at the time, was like, this is amazing. Like, I should be so chuffed. But actually, looking back, I'm like, I shouldn't feel so grateful. I shouldn't have to feel so grateful in a care system that someone wants to care for me. But again, that's another conversation. Like when I moved for the long haul to Evelyn and Clinton's, I'd say it was the best home that I had, because they paid attention to details. I felt included, and again, like the fact that I felt so grateful, so positive, so lucky, I think is the term, so lucky about feeling so lucky that I am loved, I think is sad. A lot of children in the care system don't get the privilege of an Evelyn and Clinton, where they've got a family wanting to take them in and wanting to keep them for a long period of time.
Yeah, it like you say, it should be a given that that's the sort of home you end up in. Some good things happen during this time.
Yeah.
You've got their daughter Kelly, who's particularly studious, having some sort of subconscious effect on how you approach your studies. Like, maybe I could do that a bit too, because understandably, school hadn't been particularly easy. There'd been suspensions and expulsions and moments where you were getting called into offices, etc. But that seemed to be pivotal. Married with Miss Leaf, who saw this glimmer in you, like this kid's got something about him, and we're gonna highlight his strengths here, which again goes back to us talking about Miles and how important these key figures are in kids' lives to instill confidence and to cultivate hope that they can do whatever they set out to do. So you had these two new things going on for you that felt hopeful for the first time, and that led to some seminal change. So talk to us about this. You're starting to take your studies more seriously. I know that it's not as sort of like glorious as I'm making out here. It sounds almost reductive in the way I'm telling this story, because you had this looming fate ahead of you, which was leaving the care system at 18. Goodbye care system. You're out in the big wide world on your own, with nobody, and you get yourself a council flat. Good luck. So this is looming. You know that date's coming, and you know you've got to pass your A levels because you've now got this new goal in your sights. So talk to us about what was going on around this time.
Wow, so much. Wow. So, because of this home, and you touch on Kelly being academic, there was this kind of transfer that unwittingly where I begin to do well at school. This is against the backdrop of me getting in trouble often. And then I went to a regular state school, and I get these GCSEs that are one of the highest sets in the school. So I was shocked. I was like, yo, this is crazy. Like, I've got A stars and A's. And it's not about the grades, but it's the fact that for the first time, teachers are seeing potential. So because of those grades, Miss Leaf, others, they're seeing this potential in me. So they then decide that they want to invest in my journey into sixth form college. And that leads to me going to a summer school. Story short, I then decide that I want to apply to Cambridge fucking University.
Yes!
Which is so wild, right? Because as a kid in the care system, I'm sure you can imagine it is not normal to want to go to Cambridge University. And that it is a leap. It's a leap to go from being shunted between homes, getting in trouble, getting excluded, getting suspended, to then saying, I really want to go to like one of the most elite universities in the country.
In the world?
In the world. 100%.
world.
Yes. And I still look back at that time and I'm like, where did I get that resilience from? Like, where did I get that vision? I still can't really articulate it. But love helps with aspiration, and being in a home where I felt loved. And love is such a complex and interesting word, and it means many things to different people, but just feeling like I was wanted, feeling like the family I was with valued me, they believed in me, that was world-changing. It was world-changing. And so, as you say, I'm also having to grapple with the very big looming reality of leaving care. So on one hand, this bloke wants to go to Cambridge University. He wants to do that process, do the interviews, do the exams. But also he's being told by his social worker that, well, I was being told that at 18, you're going to move into a council flat. So I'm juggling like my future and the wide-eyed aspiration of what I could do versus, oh, but at 18, like, can I even cook a meal? Can I do my laundry? Can I pay utilities? And there were times where those two aspects of thought clashed. So, for example, I was told that if I wanted to go to university outside London, I'd forfeit my right to a council flat, because when you leave care, you get a council flat. So that could have crushed my aspiration. And there were so many moments of the leaving care process that could have really put to the grave any potential I had for university or anything else. I had the resilience to navigate that, and I'm grateful that I got through it. I'm grateful that I left care, got the council flat, went to university.
Went to Cambridge.
But the average, like, you shouldn't have to feel so resilient. At 16, 17, you shouldn't have to battle the system to get the support you need to do well. And it felt like an upstream struggle for so many years, advocating for myself, challenging the local authority, going to my local MP because I wanted somewhere to live when I went to university. Like, I shouldn't have had to do all of that stuff to make it at Cambridge. But I did it and I'm chuffed. Yeah. And it served me well. It served me well.
Oh, it's just, honestly, it's so brilliant. There's so many thoughts coming into my head right now, because I think for so many kids, whether they're in care or, I don't know, they're in a family where they could be the first person to go to university. Yeah. Like, my brother was the first person in our family to go to university. No one had been to university before, and I didn't go to university. But often there's this weird sweet spot of like, how big do I dream? Am I allowed to have these big aspirations?
Yeah.
Is this blue sky thinking, or is this me being deluded?
Yeah.
And I think people get really confused about that, especially young people. Like, can I break the mold of my family, my community, my background, whatever it might be? What would your response to that be?
Wow. That is a lovely question, because I think, at least since being an adult, the one conviction I have is that your aspiration, your vision for your life should not be determined by your start in life. It shouldn't be determined by debilitating things that people have said. It shouldn't be determined by your mistakes. You should have the ability to build a future, dream for a life that is not inhibited. And being a looked after child, being turfed between homes, making mistakes at school, having to navigate the care system, all of those things meant that it was really hard to live like that. It meant that I had to find it within myself to overcome. But now that I've got my degree, now that I'm, a broadcaster at the Beeb, which again is not a place full of care experience people, shout out to the BBC, now that I'm in these spaces and now that I live the life that I live, I am all the more convicted that me being a foster kid shouldn't deter me from what I want to do. And I remember my graduation dinner. It's like, the best analogy is like the Great Hall in Harry Potter. It's like, it's people in black robes. It's all intimidating. Things are said in Latin. You've got all this cutlery. Anyway, we're at this graduation dinner. I've got my degree. I've got a 2-1 in history. And I'm nursing some ice cream. I'm having my dessert. And the master of the college, because each college has a master, he stands up and he says, now it's time to give out this really bougie award. And he says, all us teachers and fellows were unanimous. This award goes to Ashley John-Baptise. And apparently I had just made a positive mark on the college. And I didn't hear him. I was still nursing my ice cream. Like, I was just eating my dessert, being like, we're going for a rave tonight, graduating. And I'm eating my ice cream and a mate taps me on the shoulder. And he's like, oh, Ashley, it's you.
This is so good.
And I literally look, and the master's got this fat silver cup, this gong for this award. And I have to stand up and I have to walk to the master to get this cup. And like, students are clapping, people are cheering, the haters are cheering. Don't you love when a hater has to cheer? And I'm getting this award, and I just went back to When Joyce Let Me Go. And I went back to being in my council flat before uni, where I was too broke to be able to put together some tuna pasta, Fearne. And I'm going back to all these moments of feeling completely inadequate, and all those words in the media that you sometimes hear about foster children, like disadvantaged, the underclass. I went back to all those moments, yet here I am at Cambridge University getting an esteemed award amongst, some really clever people. And I just remember thinking, like, there's nothing that looked after children can't achieve. Again, going back to that point, there is nothing that you should withhold from you because of your start in life. Like, this was a private moment. It wasn't public, but it was so defining because I had overcome stigma. And obviously, it's not always going to be academia. For some kids, it might be entrepreneurship or whatever. But we've all got talent. We've all got potential. We've all got something to contribute. And that conviction has really served me, not being defined by my start in life. And it may not be like an opportunity that I go for, it might be who I choose to interact with. Like, just because I'm, you know, mixed race and from South London, it doesn't mean that I can't have posh mates or whatever. I think it's just about being open and not being defined by social workers and the BS that can come from being in the care system.
Yeah. It's a powerful, powerful point that I think many people out there need to hear. It is deeply moving and incredible hearing your story. And as I said to you before we started, I loved reading your book. Congratulations on it being published.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for teaching us more about the care system, because I think we need to keep talking about this subject and making sure that those people that don't feel seen and heard, that we're really there.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ashley.
Pleasure. Cheers.